Hi, Tai.
Hi Bruno, how are you?
Fine, and you?
I'm okay. Hi Rob.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi. Hi Dominique. Hi Brian.
Hey guys.
Hey, Ty. Everybody.
Hello, guys.
Hi Gilberto. Okay, so I think we can start. Yeah, last meeting we reviewed the I3C specification, and I think we went over all the comments, right, Bruno?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So okay, so Okay, so I think that first we have next step is the OCE link layer. So Brian, I'm glad you're here today, and we need to discuss our next steps. What are our next steps with the specification? And now that we have these two major sections, and so first, Brian, anything new about the link layer?
Um, we had a discussion about this yesterday, Jeff and I,
Yes.
and I think so. We have two different ways of transporting messages right now. We have a special message packet that's a non-credited kind of guaranteed stream of bandwidth, and Jeff was proposing that we add something additionally, either in some way to the spec to make larger packets, to make MCTP or MTP or whatever, just raw packet transport, a little more cleanly, or a little more efficiently, I guess is a better way to say that. And so I think Jeff is still thinking on it, I think, from his side. But I think my personal opinion right now is we just do a dedicated bus protocol variant just for those protocols. And so it's optimized for those. And I think I think that binding would look very simple from the link layers perspective. And that's probably like a one pager kind of a thing. But I think right now the debate is whether since 2.0 is still open and we're still discussing features, though I think we've closed quite a few of them recently. Whether we need anything else from a top level spec perspective to support MCTP, for instance. I think there was like Jeff was thinking like maybe we do some sort of variable sized TLP thing or something like that. I'm not sure exactly how we would accommodate that right now. So I think that discussion's still open. But I think again, from a top level perspective, as long as the MCTP packet size is static, I think it's very clean binding. So you can again, we can write that up in the next week or two and for review.
Okay.
But I think it maps reasonably well to the existing link layer.
Okay, but why you say it's related to the profile?
So the way that the link layer works is the base link layer only has a couple of different packet types. Credit returns, simple messages, and virtual wires, right? And then what you typically do is you write what's called a profile that adds all the other packet types for it. Like you would have a profile that would have multiple types of buses, like an AXI, an APB, et cetera. And you would assign those to different profile IDs and stuff, different TLP IDs. And then there's a secondary document, what we call as a bus protocol variant. And that's basically almost like a header file for the profile. So it's like, you'd have a bus protocol variant for AXI that said, okay, for each of the different AXI streams, these are the field orders for the TLP, right? Like you have whatever. And anyway, these are the different field orders for the bus and how it maps to a TLP. So in the profile, all you do is say, the profile would have like a table that says, all right, here's all of the bus protocol variants I'm using. Here's all of the IDs I'm using. And then any other special details in terms of latencies or anything like that for the profile. So each individual document is pretty simple. And so, you can build upon them each other. But like if you look at our repository, I think Ventana originally wrote a profile and they didn't want to reference other documents. So they just included all their bus protocol variants in their profile, which is also fine too. And so the generally
but
what
Brian, we should be agnostic to the bus kind, whether it's an XI or HB.
the link layer itself, like our base spec, doesn't have any bus protocols in it, right? It's just a way to transport payloads across the link and distinguish streams, right? So that's the entire point of it. And so you add these other documents onto it in order to do specific bus protocols or different, like a bus protocol variant document is a specific bus protocol. Like you would have a bus protocol variant for AXI, a bus protocol variant for APB. In this case, a bus protocol variant for MCTP. And then you would have a profile that groups them together. Like if you want AXI plus APB plus MCTP, that's a profile. And so
yes, but we should have MCTP, but I think we should be agnostic whether it's AXI or APB. Is it?
Yeah.
Okay?
They're not tied to each other. Yeah.
Okay.
So the bus protocol variants are all independent, and the profile is them tied together. So if you have a specific, like you built a controller for a die-to-die controller for your chip, that's going to have a profile, or it's going to have a set of profiles that you have to pick from, right? And each profile would be a group of possible buses, right? And you have to statically define them at some point because you have to assign all of the different bus streams static IDs, right, to simplify the link layer design. And so at some point you say, I'm using MCTP, that MCTP is stream 5 or whatever it is, right? And so you can actually decode that data and then put those MCTP packets into the right bin. And so those are defined at some point, and that's in a document called a profile. But we don't have to say that right now. We can just define it as a bus protocol variant, and then everyone will know, okay, this is how you map MCTP into a profile. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yes, I think so. Any comment from anyone?
Again, I think the consolation right here, like I was saying originally, is for a 1.x bus protocol variant, then the packet sizes are static, right? So if your max packet size in MCTP is 4K, then you either define a 4K TLP or you define something smaller with a way to concatenate the packets in the protocol layer, right? So one way or the other. And I think that's something we're exploring for 2.0, and I think there's conflicting opinions about whether we want to support something that's not static. I think that's the only catch right now. So if you use the system as it is right now, it's a static number, and we'll have to define what that number is.
I see. So do you think anyone think there is an issue that will have a static size of the packet? Is it?
No, but I was thinking that maybe it's a kind of difference we may have when we want to deal with different physical interfaces.
Oh, yeah. So we provide bindings from the TLP to different interfaces. So we have BoW, we have UCIe, and we have BoW Flexi right now in our 2.0 spec. And so and you deal with them slightly differently depending on which physical interface you're dealing with. BoW Flexi in particular is very different from the other two. And I think there's some considerations right now on UCIe. We're doing just the raw streaming interface. I think at some point we may do one of the other ones, like the low latency FLIT one or something like that. But I think there's right now, because we already have ECC and stuff, and our LLP size matches, then it's just UCIe streaming. That's something I think we need to double check, I guess, with 2.0, because I think we're changing our LLP size. But I don't think it really affects a whole lot. So But for MCTP, I think that all of the features that you would need there exist on all the different bindings. So if you need to if you had a really long TLP, like you had a 4K TLP, you can still stretch that across pretty much all the physical bindings, I don't think, without an issue, I don't believe.
Sorry if I misunderstood, but you were saying that the packet size is going to be the same in Flexi as in UCIe?
Yeah, so it would, when I say packet, there's multiple layers of
Oh,
packets.
yeah. Sorry.
So it would be the transaction layer packet, the TLP.
Okay.
And the link layer packet, which goes over the physical link, is obviously different depending on the binding. And so
Right,
for BoW Flexi, we had to because our TLPs don't match, we have like a continue bit where you can go over multiple BoW Flexi transactions to communicate a single transaction layer packet.
Okay. I guess as long as it's the right size, I'm fine, but I'm not sure if we've fully theorized all the use cases, but
yeah. So I think the only thing worrisome, I guess, from a MCTP point of view is 4K is very large compared to all the other bus streams. So if we don't add an additional layer of continuation at the protocol level, then it would monopolize the interface for longer than any other stream.
Exactly.
So I think that would be something we would consider at the protocol level, just adding a continue bit there or something like that, or an additional substream or something like that, so that you can break up that 4K packet into 1Ks or something like that. That's an open discussion about how we actually size that and whether we need an additional stream ID or something. So we have another message transport right now. It's just called a message packet, but it's like a non-credited message packet. So you can just send us. You can, in your profile, you say what's the rate you can send these at, basically. But basically, it's like a sideband stream, and the intended use is for low latency system management stuff. But the packets are only 2 bytes of payload, so you could, in theory, stream MCTP over there, which is take a very long time. So depending on what bandwidth you might need for something like this, I mean, it's still possible to just use the existing mechanism and do that. But I think people, especially for firmware downloads and stuff, they probably want a dedicated higher bandwidth stream. Well, I guess technically you can just, depending on how you set your profile up, you could just fill your whole LLP with message packets or message TLPs. You pay an efficiency cost, so you'd only get like 50% of the bandwidth efficiency. Or if the goal here is just one-time firmware download, not that big of a deal. Anyway, it's an option if people wanted that, but I think I think people would just define a new TLP stream for it. Oh, and there was another idea that Jeff proposed of overloading the message type ID. But I don't know if the spec really supports that right now. So that's an open discussion, I guess.
Okay.
What are we just talking about there? Is that BoW Flexi? I'm sorry, I joined late.
We're talking about the MCTP binding, and I was telling them all the different options we have for message transport right now, about whether we do a message like a MCTP best protocol variant for overloading the type ID of current messages, or flexible linked packets and stuff like that. And I think if you're doing it at 1.x right now, you either do it as a whole bunch of low payload message packets, or you do it as we do a bus protocol variant. And that we were discussing whether we needed to add features in 2.0 to better support anything.
Yeah, I mean, what I did is try to do a survey of different message formats, and I just kind of generalized it as you have a length field in bytes that kind of says how long the message is going to be. And then you could do that with just one message call, you could set up a transfer, right? And if it's long, then it would suspend and it would suspend and restart such that it doesn't hog the channel, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think
So
right
that's
now for
yeah.
1.x, we are doing, I mean, for 1.x, it's a static link effectively.
Yep.
And that I think if we were doing suspend and restart at the protocol layer, we would add something in the bus protocol variant to describe that functionality. Because I don't think we really have that at the link layer right now. So again, I think it's debatable whether we add features and where we add them right now. So I think that's
Yep.
Okay. So I think the next subject is going back to something we started a long time ago and to define the API that we are using for different aspects of the system aspects of the chiplets.
I think there's
Yeah.
one more thing we need to
Yeah.
make sure we do before we get back to that, which is SCMI to MCT binding. I don't know that we talked about that, but are we going to put that in our spec? Is that going to be the SCMI spec? Wasn't sure.
Can you remind what
Well,
is
we
the
just have to
need?
show. Right now, we show a way of packing SCMI messages into MCTP. Should that be in the spec that we're working on, or because it's across every set of transports? Should we put that in SCMI spec? But that's an ARM question because they own that spec. So
Uh, I think from ARM's perspective, I mean, I just joined this meeting for today. We had the discussion with several folks inside ARM, right, regarding the MCTP SCMI binding. And the way it is today in the spec as defined, I think it is a TBD, right? What is the MCTP message type? And that needs to be standardized. Now, there are a couple of ways of going about it. One is that we could potentially, so either it's DMTF defined standard or it's a vendor defined standard, right? So if it's a vendor defined stuff, then it has to be something that OCP then takes on the responsibility for, takes it out of the OCP space, and then defines the next level payload. But then it has a sort of tie into OCP, and then how can we use it more widely is a question that needs to be asked. The other option that could be done is that we could ask DMTF to standardize it, which means and the potential way of then doing that would be to have somewhere like a public version of the spec that we have today at maybe a 0.9 version. And then we refer to this spec in DMTF to come up with the actual normative version of it in DMTF saying, and so the DMTF version becomes the normative version, and the spec that it stands today becomes the sort of informative version. And that way that buys in total standardization story then that can be used across the board by anyone without having to resort to vendor defined message types.
yeah, and I think the key point of that, Shivik, if I understand it correctly, is about getting a specific message type, official DMTF defined message type for SCMI rather than it having to be a vendor plus type arrangement, right? So we
Yes.
could define within OCP if it was an OCP spec, but it would stay a vendor specific thing rather than a official DMTF defined message type.
That's right, yes. So the advantage of doing it via DMTF is that it becomes a part of the DMTF standard, but the disadvantage is that if DMTF wants to then allocate that ID, and there'll be a voting process there definitely, and if it goes through, then they would want to hold the normative binding of the spec, which means that everything else needs to become informative at that point in time. Which means that the main SCMI spec then points to the DMTF spec. This particular OCP spec then probably needs to be tweaked to become the informative version, then points to that spec as the official binding, and then the rest of the stuff on top on the spec, on this spec can still remain because it provides useful information, but the actual normative is in the DMTF.
Yeah, I don't know enough about DMTF. Is that the way that they did other things like redfish and things, what you
Yeah,
just described? Okay,
yeah.
so
So
maybe that's the standard way of doing it.
yeah, so for any binding that DMTF defines, DMTF owns the spec. There were some deviations for other things like PCIe, but even for PCI, you'll see DMTF holding a particular version of the spec. You could see industry bodies try to hold their own version of the binding and ask DMTF to make a reservation for a message type, but then that involves a formal collaborative agreement with DMTF, and that involves legals and then collaboration agreements and stuff like that, which is a bit of a pain to go through if you want to go through that direction. So there are three ways here, right? One is that OCP defines an OCP vendor ID and then defines the vendor-defined payload. So you'll have to define an OCP-defined PCIe ID and an OCP-defined IANA ID, which will be common to OCP and across OCP, all of OCP projects, right? Not only this. And then that needs to have an OCP-specific vendor ID packet payload format, right? Under which an SCMI will probably get a message type, right? And that's then an OCP standard, and then the question needs to be asked if somebody needs to implement it in a platform, right? That does have nothing to do with the OCP standard. Is it still legal to use that? That's one way. The next way is going through the legals and let OCP own it and DMTF signs off. That's a bit of a stretch. People who work on DMTF on ARM tell me that's extremely hard to pull off, and the legals and the paperwork itself is quite big and large. And the third option is that we put a public version of the spec as it stands today. DMTF, we raise another request in DMTF for DMTF to own the normative version, and the DMTF version will be a squeezed down version of the actual spec that we have proposed. But it will potentially carry a message ID allocation. It will carry the part of the EID allocation using the agent IDs potentially there, and that would be it. And then the OCP version will then need to transition to an informative version once the DMTF one is published. That's the third option.
Yeah, none of them sound super straightforward, but maybe the last one is the easiest. I worry about making a blanket OCP vendor ID because I have no idea what's going on in the rest of OCP. Maybe it already exists. I guess try to figure that out too, but there's so much stuff going on.
ARM were telling me that OCP did define some vendor ID for GPU firmware updates in some scenarios, but it sort of ended up overlapping with some things in DMTF, and there are some issues there as well. So I mean, so there might be issues there, and then there's a long-term maintenance contract as well, because if OCP owns the pen on that, then OCP needs to maintain this on a longer-term basis rather than just being a one-time effort and then forget about it. If it is in DMTF, then DMTF takes the responsibility of maintaining it as it does for all the specs.
Yeah, I mean, it seems better because they have the expertise and they have the machinery to do that, right? And people would know where to go.
And that's one of the very reasons why inside ARM, when we were thinking of doing this, we never defined this inside ARM because we didn't want to again put an ARM vendor ID there and force everyone to use an ARM vendor ID. SCMI as a spec is open to use, right? But the way MCTP gets done is that you need that message type, and that can either be a DMTF-allocated type or a vendor ID type, and then that becomes a bit tricky.
Well, if DMTF takes a long time, perhaps that could be the long-term goal, like I think you were saying, and then OCP could do a short-term goal of getting agreement, and you can even socialize it amongst all the project leads in OCP, so and make sure everybody is aware of this, and then just if we get that stake in the ground, then DMTF can work in the background and take however long it needs. Does that sound good?
Precisely. I think that was one of the options I was advised with, was that the DMTF process is likely to take 12 to 16 weeks, right, end to end, if we have got a spec in line. And thankfully, I think the spec today looks considerably good. We don't have to tweak many things around it. Because we have that, it's around a 16 odd week process in DMTF, give or take. But if we have a stake in the ground with the current version of the spec released publicly as 0.9 or whatever, right? Then we could start say, here's an OCP spec. DMTF wants to create a normative version of it. Let's create it. And then OCP spec moves to informative version once the DMTF one is done. And that could be the way out.
So I guess there's two angles to approach there. One is to try and find out about OCP defined vendor specs if we need to, right? And the other would be to what do you think, Shuvik, the process is if we want to try and approach DMTF for this? Do you have an idea about what's the best way to go about that?
Yeah, I think there are two ways of going about that, right? So if this spec were public in the current form, the message ID can still remain TBD, right? And we can then go to DMTF, right? And say, yes, we want to create an SCMI-over-MCTP binding using DMTF because there's a requirement for interoperability between chiplets, and OCP already has a spec around, an illustrative spec around it that we want allocations for. That, and then we vote, get a document ID there, and once the document ID is allocated, we can start working on the spec, and everything from this spec can be moved. But I think in order to say in OCP that in order to say in DMTF that there is a spec in OCP and there is this use case, we need a public version of this particular spec. And I don't think that the current draft that we have is public. At least we couldn't find anything that was public.
I mean, it's not public as in it's not published officially on OCP's list of approved specs. I mean, that's certainly true. There would be an OCP approval process for that.
Yes, and the question is, how do we go about that as well? Because
I think that process is at least known, or I know people like Mark and stuff have been through it. Matt Knight have been through it with the FPSA and stuff. So and Anu and other people in the OCE group. So from that point of view, that process is at least known, or we have people who know how to do that if we want to do that.
And you're saying from that, unless that thing is an OCP version spec, it cannot be visible even in a public Google Drive or something like that.
It can be visible in a public Google Drive. Yes, absolutely. So it could be it's something that people could share a link to, right? And it'd be viewable by everybody in the
correct.
Its permissions wouldn't be restricted.
To begin the DMTF
in general, OCP materials and all these work group calls and everything are all free and open to everybody. And so most of the work groups have Google Drives anybody can get to.
Yes, we can also put it in a link in our wiki page, so it is open to everyone. It's not like an official spec, but it's like can be a working document, but everyone can see it.
I think that's the difference. It would be an OCP working group working document, not an officially OCP approved document. And I guess it depends on whether that differentiation matters.
I do not think that differentiation is going to matter, because if the normative version comes out of DMTF, all they need to know is that this is the direction of travel in OCP and this is the particular use case, and hence the work can begin in DMTF, right? At least we can start the discussion in DMTF with some link somewhere that anybody can access. Today, I don't think we have that, right?
Okay, well, as I said, we can easily fix that by making, putting it on the wiki page, and then it should be, we can share that as a something which is open because it's on the OCP wiki, and people can find that and have a reference to that. So that in itself shouldn't be a problem.
Yes, that should, and then we can go to DMTF, point at it, and ask and vote and put a request for a document number. And hopefully once that gets done, or if there are any objections, we can come back to this group and discuss.
Sure. So in terms of DMTF, is that something that we, as in me, you, and others in ARM, would be able to progress?
Yes, I think we can, because we do have representatives in DMTF in ARM, and I can reach out to them and try to create a case for it. We don't need to start with the formal spec in DMTF. The way it works is that we put the use case or the requirement for a binding, why it's required, a link to the OCP spec as a proof point of why it's required, and then ask for a document identifier allocation. And if the document identifier is allocated because people have voted for it, then I think that's the step when you start working on the spec.
Okay, sounds like a plan.
Okay, so Dominic, can you drive it? Decide what is the actual message type and.
Yeah, I mean, between myself and Jovik, we can see that happens. I think if on your side, if you can make sure there's a public link on the wiki and stuff to it that we can refer to, then that would be good.
Okay. So okay, but what is do you want to select a message type that we will write in the document?
It will be part of the request sent to the DMTF. So I would guess that we will initiate the discussion with DMTF, and if they somehow acknowledge the request, they will at some point say to share with us that they have a message type reserved for SCMI.
Yeah, I assume they have a process for assigning it, which is their own.
Do you know which group in the DMTF this would go to?
This would probably go to PMCI.
Okay.
Again, I'm not the definitive owner there. I'll talk to whoever is a rep, right? And I've already given him a heads up, so we can then start the process once we have the link to the OCP document that we can rely on, and then create the messaging around it.
Okay, so you say it's enough just to add a link to the I3C spec, that would be enough?
We think so at this point in time.
Okay.
So we'll again revert back to this forum if we think more is required. At least that will help us start the DMTF process.
Okay, so I will add this link.
I think that
I was just going to say I can keep in sync with Shervik, and I can report back here if there's any additional requirements.
Yes, on my side, I just wanted to say that maybe I need a few days to polish a little bit the document.
Okay, so let me know once you feel it's okay. I will add it to our wiki page.
Okay.
Rob, this plan is okay with you?
Yeah, it sounds great. Yeah, I didn't have any idea how to do the process, so it sounds like we have folks that know how to get it done. So that's great.
Okay, great.
We have people who know people who know people.
Yeah.
That's yeah, that's better than me. I'm sure I could have. I'm sure we have representatives too, but I just have no idea who they are. I got to go search everywhere for them. So at least you know somebody.
Okay, so we'll progress with that.
Yeah, so now I have
Cool.
one other MCT binding
Cool.
going the other way is do we want I'm not sure how we want to handle binding the UCIe management. I talked to one of the manageability work group chair, and he said he's still got an agreement open with DMTF to basically, if we supply a binding spec, they'll put it in their process to do it. But I wasn't sure if people thought that was the best way to go. It would be owned by UCIe, or do we want to try to tackle it some other way? Given that we have DMTF experts on the call, maybe it's a good discussion point.
Well,
Or people who know DMTF experts.
This is MTCP over UCIe MTP.
Yes.
Some of these acronyms are too far too alike.
Yeah, so basically MCTP over the UCIe management stuff, right? I mean, how we actually do the binding would probably look at a little deeper, but basically, we talked last week about maybe using MCTP as the SCMI layer, right? So it always talks to MCTP, and we're going down the path of getting that all nicely formalized with DMTF. The latest thing I had skipped MCTP. It went SCMI to directly to UCIe, but mainly because there is no MCTP way to get onto UCIe. So what I'm asking is, if we want to make sure we keep this MCTP layer, then we need the layer that connects MCTP to UCIe, and where should we do that work?
Rob, and I know you're in the UCIe work group. I'm there as well, right?
Yeah.
It sounds like that belongs in UCIe or DMTF, right?
That's what That's what I think, but I wanted to get other people's opinions. The thing is, we're going to rely on it, and this group won't really have much control. Now, I could probably volunteer to do it in the UCIe group and nobody would complain. So there's that connection, but it's not an official OCP thing. Maybe that's okay.
Well, UCIe and DMTF set up an alliance a few years ago, and they have a formal process, as I recall.
I don't think it's ever been used. Yes, there is
okay.
This was what it was for. We talked about it years ago of creating this binding, and then there was never a need for it, so nobody ever, really did the work to turn the crank. I could try to kick that off if we think that's the right way to go.
Well, I think I was the one that raised this option. It was just, I thought it will be, it will align all our protocol in a similar way. But if it complicates stuff, then I'm taking back my suggestion.
Yeah, I don't know that.
Maybe still everyone thinks it's okay. But for me, when I raise it, if it's complicates stuff, then maybe it's not that necessary.
I mean, the thing is, it probably complicates getting it started, but maybe it makes it easier later on if you need to bridge like I3C to UCIe. Using SCMI, you have a method. You have a well-defined method to do that. Not sure if that'll end up ever needing, right? I mean, if you make it so the SCP becomes completely agnostic, that's probably not a bad thing.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say is if you want to have a choice to go over UCIe sideband or even mainband through MTP, and you don't have to change your whole software stack behind that, that feels better, or you have to change a driver level rather than the whole process up. But I guess SCMI in some way gives you a little bit of that, but I guess if that could be agnostic of multiple things, then that I mean it sounds pretty good from an architecture perspective. So especially as that could be extended to other things as well.
Yeah, I mean that's what's kind of attractive is that okay, because we at the beginning of the meeting we talked about getting it over bunch of wires transport, and so if it's just MCTP and we just do all those bindings below, then SCMI never has to know what it's going to something else. There's another layer which does binding, but that's okay. We'd never have to like touch the SCMI spec, right? Or create another shim layer.
Yeah,
which seems attractive.
it does.
Okay, so you all think it's worth the effort using the MCTP?
I'd say it's in my mind it's the direction to go until we hit some roadblock. And I can try to find out if there's any real roadblocks. If there is any in the UCIe standard, getting it done.
Okay. What else, Rob?
Those are the two big things. It was all around MCTP coming down and going up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have two plans for these to tackle these two items.
Yeah, and I was also thinking that maybe it could be good to add the slides, I did for this protocol over I3C on the wiki page so that the guys from DMTF, they can have access both to the spec and to the introduction slides.
Okay, sure. I'll add once it's ready, I'll add both of them.
I think so, and I still think it would be valuable, Bruno, for you to present in the FCSA working group.
Okay.
I think also Anu asked you, Bruno, to present it on the Friday meeting.
Yes, it would be.
Okay.
We need to schedule it. Yes.
You do a road trip of the. It's a a tour of the various working groups.
Right, or maybe I'm wrong. She asked you to present it on Friday, or
Yes, the OCE weekly call. Yes, but we can do it for both the OCE weekly call and the FCSA call. That's okay.
Okay, great. Okay, so now next item can be the API. Going back to the API. Now that we have the definition of how we want to, what is the infrastructure to transfer the message.
And yes, maybe something before that, because some weeks ago we wondered if the SCMI is somehow the right protocol to be used for system control interfaces between chiplet, and I think it would be maybe interesting to have maybe a presentation from ARM about that, because I think that in the latest version, the version 4.0, there are modifications related to the support of chiplets. So it would be interesting if at ARM you can present the way to use it at the server level and how to use it at inside the chip.
You talked about the SCMI,
Yeah,
but we just said we want to
we said we want to
remove
use
it
it,
from
but it would
remove it from the also from the UCIe, right?
no.
Or maybe
I'm
I
talking
think,
about the yeah.
sorry, Bruno, you talking about using it as how you use the higher level layer of actual, the communication, the functionality of the SCMI and how you do that
Yes,
communication, regardless of
yes, and
on what
mm.
method you transport it, right?
Yes, independently about the way to transport transactions. Just the way you envision using the SCMI protocol for chiplet-based systems.
Yeah, I mean, Shivik's here. He's Mr. SCMI in ARM, so I don't know if he has a opinion of that. I mean, I don't mind making that presentation, but it would be in collaboration with him as well. So
It'll be also probably good to know, is there if there is anything specific you're looking for? Because there are interpretations of it relative to in-band from the operating system, and then there are the chip-to-chip, firmware-to-firmware, or micro-to-micro messages that go across, and it would be good to know which of these is the interest centered around.
yeah, I mean, to speak to others, they can comment, but I think we're very much talking about the firmware to firmware, chiplet to chiplet interfaces.
And maybe the way to manage the system in a kind of, I would say, both centralized way and distributed way. So we may have a kind of a hybrid system control at the system level, for which we can have task centralized when we want to be consistent and when there are no real-time constraints. And we may want to have distributed system control task for to handle real-time and localized tasks. And yes, and we may also want some kind of some degree of maybe autonomy for chiplets. And so I was wondering if you have a viewpoint on how the way to implement this kind of system control framework.
I think we can definitely try to go through a few of these use cases and what can be deployed today, right? I'm not saying it's going to be a very comprehensive view of what is deployed, because a lot of the deployments are proprietary by people who deploy it as well, right? There might be other aspects there, but we can definitely discuss the capabilities that you can deploy and what it just needs to deploy it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it would be interesting to have use cases, examples of what is done for now. I would say at system meaning blade level, and what could be based on that, what could be done at the system level, meaning system based on design on thanks to chiplets.
Okay, maybe Suvik can put our heads together and maybe try and come up with something on that.
Okay. So you want to schedule it for next week meeting? Is it okay?
Maybe
I would
it's
say
the chat
no.
parties.
Sorry.
I'm not.
So we're not. I think that we are not in a hurry for that. You can take
Yes.
some
Yes.
time.
Yeah, I would
Sure.
schedule it for a few weeks time, because there's,
Okay.
I know I've set and have holidays come up and other things which are maybe a priority to to organize, but certainly something we can think about.
Sure. So let us know when you can present it.
Okay.
Okay. So I think we can adjourn. We can talk about the API next week. Anything else? So, okay. So thanks everyone.
Right. Thanks,
Thanks a lot.
guys.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
We'll talk next week. Bye bye.